went from, is this really possible, to now we're at the point of not only is it possible, but it's going to need less resources and qubits than we thought. And I mean, what a time to be in this industry.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's that surprising. My partner, co-founder, and chief science officer, Professor Rui Ozeri from the Weizmann Institute of Science, always says that when he was young, he had a Commodore 64. Right? Commodore.
Welcome to Impact Quantum.
Quantum podcast, turn it up fast. Candace and Frank blowing my mind at last. Quantum podcast, they're breaking the mold. Science and sky beats, it's bold and it's...
Hello and welcome back to Impact Quantum, the podcast. We explore the emerging industry and field that is quantum computing. We don't need to have a PhD, even if it helps. You just need to be curious. And with me is the most quantum curious person I know, Candace Gooley. How's it going, Candace?
It's great. Today is like the first truly warm day we have had in April, and it makes me believe that this is not going to be a false spring in Montreal. We're going to actually finally get some warm weather. So I'm very excited today.
That's cool. I had to drag my tomato plants inside because we had a frost warning here. So
there you go. And they're so delicate in the very beginning. Everyone's
Yes.
doing their early planting inside the house right now, getting all the little buds ready. So I'm very excited about today. We're going to be speaking with Tal David. He is the co-founder and CEO at Quantum Art.
Oh, very cool.
Hi, Tal. How are you doing today?
Hi, guys. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So what does Quantum Art do?
Quantum Art is a startup company building the world's best quantum computers based on trapped ion qubits and with unique and proprietary engineering map on how to scale up quantum computers from the small systems that we have today, which are very impressive but not yet doing commercially interesting stuff, to large enough systems that still retain the base performance, but now would be able to tackle the world's largest compute heavy tasks.
Oh, very cool.
So
So it's not an art company. Sorry,
Oh,
Candace. I
we
didn't
are
want to
doing
take
a
over.
work of
No.
art.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
true. Art and engineering. Fair enough. I'll go with that.
so you've moved between academia, government, and now you're involved in startup leadership. So what has changed in how you think about impact across all those worlds?
Well, there are different types of impact, different places in your life. When I did my PhD, the thing that interests me most was tuning the knobs and taking graphs and measurements and stuff like that. And then when I went to the industry, I wanted to do stuff that actually get used by people around the world in products and create value. And then when I moved to government, I wanted to move policies and processes and arrange for large scale programs to be advanced. And then at some point, you understand that doing things from within government has its own specific dynamics, and maybe we could do things even faster and better than that. And then I decided to go outside of government again and form a startup as a very, very deep technological project, but something that can also go and do impact and create value in the world. And it's like having a baby all over again, right? It's building it from scratch and trying to understand what it wants from you when it cries, and then getting it all grown up and hopefully going to graduate school someday.
I mean,
I
that's a
like
good
it.
way to put it, right? Because there's certain advantages to I live in the DC, Baltimore area, right? So there's certain advantages to being part of the government ecosystem, and there's certain disadvantages of it, right? And there's certain advantages of the entrepreneurial world, and there's a lot of disadvantages too, right? So it's and I think governments around the world are because technology is such a foundational um, aspect of a modern economy, whether those are GPUs, quantum computers, or pick your tech. It I think everybody's trying to figure out how do you combine the two? Like how do you get the best of an entrepreneurial with the kind of the aspect of government?
Yeah, so First of all, I'm not alone. All right. I have
Right.
amazing co-founders and I have an outstanding team, and I'm just here moving papers around the desk. But I think that um, taking the experiences from different places along the path allows you to form a more complete holistic picture and understand what are the right ways to move or to motivate processes depending on what kind of processes there are and who you're talking with. Okay, in quantum, what we're doing is hard tech. There's a lot of work to do in the lab, which is quite deep and difficult to understand for a lot of people. But again, when you want to raise money to enable the company to grow, when you want to get to the relevant funding, which at this point is still very much tied to governmental funding and stuff like that, it helps a lot to understand how the language of going in those corridors needs to be. What motivates the people there, how the processes behave, and what's the dynamics in order to be able to get to your goals in a focused, meaningful way. But it's not only about one person. You need to assemble the best team on the planet if you want to win in this game, for sure.
Was there a moment when quantum stopped feeling like research and started feeling like something that must be built?
Well, in general, in the industry, I would say that the idea of quantum computing was coined by Professor Richard Feynman in the early 80s when he said, well, if nature is quantum, let's build something that simulates it quantum mechanically. That makes the most sense, right? And then quantum computing was a nice esoteric idea for a couple of decades until in the mid 90s, Professor David Shor from the University of Yale came up with an algorithm that is now known as Shor's algorithm to factorize large numbers into their prime factors, which is at the heart of decrypting most of the public key distribution methods that we have today. And that was the first time that an actual practical, meaningful, commercially viable, and also scary application came about that said, hey, there's something to do with this crazy science thing that might drive it into applicability. And from there, I think that from the mid 90s until, let's say, the 2010s, there was technological advancements to show whether this thing could be built, because we're working with quantum systems. They're difficult to do. A basic building block in a quantum computer is the quantum bit or qubit, and Shor's algorithm envisioned a computer that would need like 1 billion quantum bits in order to run that kind of algorithm, in order to break RSA 2048 or equivalent. So we spend a lot of time trying to understand if this thing could be built. In the last decade or so, I think the question moves from can this thing will be built at all to when we'll be able to see that computer at scale. And there are two opposing trends going to the same goal in this sense. One trend is that the technology is maturing enough and starting to scale up enough in order to start doing meaningful, interesting demonstrations of applications. In 2025, we have a bunch of those, for example, from JP Morgan Chase, working with Quantinuum's trapped ion system, and from Google Quantum AI with their superconducting qubit system that shows initial signals of usefulness, not just, tailor-made demonstrations of the potential of quantum computers. And on the other hand, we have an opposing trend, which is really hot in the last few months, of working on the algorithm aspects of quantum computing and trying to narrow down the requirements of what is actually needed from the computer in order to realize these algorithms. And so, for example, in Shor's algorithm, we've gone down in the last couple of years from 1 billion qubits to 1 million qubits to 100,000 qubits. And just last week, there was a paper by a very serious group that showed that in some instances, they could go and solve and break RSA 2048 with only about 10,000 physical qubits, which is amazing, the rate of advancement. And so when you bring all of these two trends together and you pour in a lot of investment, both from governmental programs and from the private and public investors in the market, it builds up momentum that shows that we are right before a big break of applicability of this technology in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And the forecast is that it will impact huge markets in the trillions of dollars in value.
I mean, that's absolutely insane because it went from, is this really possible, to now we're at the point of not only is it possible, but it's going to need less resources and qubits than we thought. And I mean, what a time to be in this this industry.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's that surprising, My partner, co-founder, and chief science officer, Professor Rui Azeri from the Weizmann Institute of Science, always says that when he was young, he had a Commodore 64. Right? Commodore 64 had 64 kilobytes
Right.
in the computing power. And in a matter of, I don't know, 10, 20 years, with the invention of the integrated circuits and transistors and stuff like that, the amount of computational power of classical compute went up by 4 orders of magnitude. Okay, so
Right.
humanity knows how to do these big jumps. I think that the difference here is that because we are more advanced in technology and in modern times, the pace of progress is accelerating even faster than what we've had 50 or 70 years ago. And secondly, because of the properties of quantum physics, the computational power scaling is at some point exponential. So the benefit that you get from each jump in the capabilities of the technology is really tremendous. So I'm not sure if it's that surprising that we're moving ahead that fast. If you talk to people inside the business, they will tell you about the difficulties and how complicated it is to get to a commercial viable grade scale and so on. And this is what we're here to solve. But I think that this is truly an exciting time. And if you look at the next, until the end of this decade, for sure, this will be the ChatGPT moment, so to speak, of quantum, or some people call it Q Day, or all sorts of silly names like that.
Y2Q.
This is
Yeah.
this is a truly exciting time to be in.
Interesting. So because you mentioned Commodore 64, my focus thing is not working, but this is the Commodore 64 reference manual. I was looking around for it and I realized I put it back up on the shelf, but no, it's and that I know that sounds like a bit of a segue, but when I read this, I read this book. This is a book on registers and things like that. Honestly, when I read this when I was like 11, most of it made no sense to me. But I was curious, and that curiosity led me to figure out what some of those things meant, like words like parameters and all those things didn't really mean anything to me at the time. And I think there's a good parallel there for this, right? That curiosity will take you through the difficult points.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe one more point to make about that is that the challenge in quantum computing is how to scale up the systems, as we said before. And when you hear that sentence, it tells you, or it throws you in the area of hardware, right? How many transistors can I put inside the chip, or how many qubits can I put in my quantum processing unit? But it's not only there, because it just reminded me when you said that, when you brought that book, of how to write code lines and logic gates and so on. And now what we're doing in quantum computing is really at that point. We're taking logic gates and comprising algorithms from them and so on and so forth. And part of the scale-up challenge is also to scale up the quantum software and the compiling capabilities and automate the design, but now of quantum algorithms. And this is another exciting trend, and there are a few companies, including in Israel, that are doing amazing stuff on how to go from back of an envelope kind of things, which is nice to begin with, to actually doing large-scale quantum algorithm development that you would not need to understand at the level of the individual gate what happens way under the hood in the quantum computers. And this is something that is also part of the scale-up challenge that we're facing as an industry now.
So you describe quantum art as a full stack. What does that mean in practice, not just technically, but philosophically?
Yeah, so there are full stacks and there are full stacks, and everywhere you think that you end and you said, okay, this is the full thing, then someone comes and says, okay, but you need to look at it from broader space, and I'll explain what I mean. When I say full stack, what we mean is that the product is the whole computer, the hardware layers, the software layers, and even the application layers. Although you don't necessarily need to be an application developer per se in order to develop the whole product, which is the computer. And the computer can act as a standalone device that you deploy to the customer, or it can stand in your lab and provide quantum computing services over the cloud. Both of these models are viable and happening. Why do I say that this is not necessarily a full stack? Because at least in the near future, in the next 10, 15, 20 years, as quantum computing scales up gradually, it will still be operated, and maybe forever, it will still be operated adjacent to a very strong classical computer. Let's call it an HPC or something like that. And so you could say that the combined hybrid system of classical plus quantum working together, that is the true full stack. So it depends on where you stop along the way. But there are companies that are doing specific layers of the stack. For example, doing only the quantum error correction protocols, or doing only the electronics that are driving the pulses that operate the quantum bits inside. But companies like us, and there are a few tens of companies like us, not many in the world, in different qubit technologies, are doing the whole package, the hardware, the software, and applications all under one roof. And it doesn't mean that we need to do everything and anything by ourselves. If we don't need to reinvent the wheel, we'd rather collaborate and integrate. And we're doing that extensively, both in our home country in Israel and also abroad in the US and Europe.
Interesting.
And a lot of companies optimize only one layer. Why take on the complexity of the entire system?
Yeah, that's a good question. We started out based on 20 years of research at the Weizmann Institute of Science, and the forte of that research group was in coherent control methods for quantum systems, how to extract the most out of the physical system, okay? And this has aspects in the lowest level of software or compilers that interact immediately with the quantum bits themselves. You know, in classical compute, you have computers, software engineers, and you have hardware engineers, and they say hi in the corridor when they meet each other, but they're not intimately connected. In quantum computing, it's still, maybe it will be different in the future, but it's still now very tightly and intimately connected. And once you have that layer of the qubits and the lowest level of software, building the rest of the aspects of the quantum computer above it is an easier task, and we can do that in collaborations. And having a full computer puts you at the top of the food chain or the value chain, if you would say, because you can provide the full solution and then access the best value or upside to the investment made by our investors, or to the markets that will create revenue in this industry. So we thought that when we have the heart or the core of the quantum computers in the boundary between quantum hardware and software, this is enough in order to build the rest around it and just go with it.
That's interesting. It's a full stack approach, which, Candace is right. Like, you don't typically see that. You typically see people specialize, and I think maybe that's just a function of how immature generally the industry is.
Could
I don't
be.
mean that as a bad thing of being immature. I mean immature compared to, it's the most mature it's ever been, but I mean immature in the sense of compared to,
Yeah,
conventional computing.
maybe I'll give it a little bit of color onto that, and that is that because this is a very novel technology, it's in an embryonic phase, if you like, you'll get hurdles along the way. Okay, you'll get unexpected stuff and bottlenecks and challenges. And as much as you come to this problem with multiple tools in your toolbox of innovation and creativity, you have a better chance of going over these hurdles and on the way to the next challenges. And if we have innovation that comes from both the hardware and the software parts, it could serve in order to overcome challenges in a better way and go faster. if you have a particular problem, for example, we are tuning lasers that are interacting with our trapped ion qubits, and you need that particular system to be extremely stable. Any instability translates immediately to lower fidelity or quality in the logical operations and lower performance because of that. There are some ways to solve this in hardware. You're doing extremely sophisticated and advanced optical design of your laser system, but maybe you could relax the requirement on how stable that you need to be from a theoretical algorithmic approach or from their architecture of how you build the QPU and attack it from the algorithmic or software layers. So if you have the capability to do both, you're equipped in a very good way in order to tackle the unforeseen challenges in the future.
So if someone only understood one thing about your architecture, what would you want that one thing to be?
Yeah. So as we said, the challenge is scaling up. Today's quantum systems are tens or maybe 100 qubits. We need to get to thousands, tens of thousands, and ultimately millions of qubits. So how do you do that while retaining the best performance? In trapped ion qubits, this is the qubit modality or technology that has been around, I think, the most, and it's leading in performance at base scale in all of the major parameters like the coherence times and the fidelity and the connectivity between qubits and so on. The shortcomings in the approaches taken by trapped ion quantum computer companies are that the speed of operation of trapped ion qubits, even at base scale, are slow relative to other qubit technologies. And as you scale up, this becomes even a more complicated problem. Secondly, there are no good recipes on how to get to very large number of qubits before getting to problems in maintaining the all-to-all connectivity and so on. What Quantum Art is doing is using coherent control methods of extracting the most out of the qubits in order to reduce the time, reduce the footprint of the QPU, which means that for a given system size, we can go larger, while improving the connectivity between qubits by hundredfolds. So we are tailoring an architecture that looks at the best performance qubits and solves the shortcomings on the way to scalability that we are seeing in other approaches. This is what we're doing.
So if your architecture is built around scaling, what's the hardest thing about scaling that isn't obvious from the outside?
Oh, I think the challenge is obvious. It's stability, stability, stability.
Okay.
You need to have these things extremely stable, to have extreme well-controlled optical delivery system. I described before that we have a laser beam interacting with a qubit, right? This is a nice, fun story. But when you have 100,000 qubits, we'll have 100,000 lasers. How do you stabilize them? How do you control them? How do you make them carry out the logical operations that comprise an algorithm at that scale in a very good, stable way without needing to recalibrate like a billion constraints all of the time? So the issue is how to enlarge the number of qubits, but do it in a very, very stable way so that we keep the base performance that we have. So it's
Yeah,
easy
and
to
like
say,
I
it's not
imagine
so easy to
interference
do.
might be a problem. Is interference a problem?
Interference with what? With the outside
With the
world?
different
you mean?
lasers and things like that. Like, do the qubits interfere each other, or is that not?
I think less so.
Okay.
The laser beam diameter is about 1 micrometer. The size of an atom is almost nothing. And
Right,
so we
right,
just
right,
need to
right.
take care that the spacing between qubit and next qubit is about 5 microns, and you're pretty much okay with that. Of course, there are nuances around this thing. I think it's in the stability of the system, in the overall operation, in crosstalks between different segments in your quantum processor, that kind of stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. What about like I was talking to someone else and they had a very finely tuned like an earthquake basically meant they had to like reset everything. Is that something you have to worry about, or is that not a concern?
Well, it depends. It is a concern. We're working very hard to stabilize and to isolate the system from the environment. Our qubits are held in an electromagnetic trap in an ultra-high vacuum chamber. In order not to have, we're arranging in this trap that's an electromagnetic trap that forces the ions in the simplest of configurations to form a line of individual ions one after the other. An ion, 5 micron distance, an ion, 5 micron distance, and so on and so forth. Hovering in the vacuum. And the reason that we need them to be in a vacuum is that we don't want to have, a stray atom coming from out of nowhere that's not related to our qubits and impinge and collide with our qubits and force us to restart the calculations or something like that. So our vacuum is about 12 orders of magnitude less than the atmospheric pressure that we know from around us in normal environment. So we are investing a lot of effort in stabilizing and isolating this environment and lowering the electrical noise and laser noise and phase noise and stuff like that. But this is the part of the job.
So you talk about going from tens to thousands and even eventually millions of qubits. What actually breaks first when you're trying to scale?
What breaks in what way?
In terms of,
I
we're
think in
talking
terms
about,
of the hardware, right? In terms of I don't know, where you're going to say topology, like what is
Yeah.
what's your? I think really another way to rephrase this: what is the number one challenge to scaling? Is that a better way to say it, an alternative way to say it? Like, what's the number one engine? Is it an engineering problem? Is it a physics problem? Or well, I guess they're kind of related,
Well,
but like
it always starts from the scientific problems or risks and then goes to engineering risks.
Right.
But let's look at the basic way of how a quantum computer based on trapped ion works. Okay, we have this string of individual ions. Each ion is a qubit. We're defining the 0 and 1 logical states in internal energy level pair inside the ion. And with a laser, we can tune the logic state to be at 0 or at 1 or in a quantum superposition of 0 at 1 in the same time, and so on. That's the basic thing, operations on single qubits. In order to do logic now, we need to do logic gates. This is an operation on one qubit that is dependent on the state of another. So we have these two ions, and they're two internal energy level pairs, and we need to connect them somehow. So we need a mediator or a data bus in order to do that. And our mediator is common motion. Like when I pluck on a guitar string, I excite all these modes of motion in the string, right? Then I pluck using lasers on this ion string and induce motion. If I've had only two ions and only one dimension, they could either move in phase like that or out of phase, okay? As much as I add more and more ions, and I also work not in one dimension, but in 3 dimensions, I add more and more degrees of freedom, okay? And handling a lot of degrees of freedom becomes a serious control problem. Now, for many, many years, all of the quantum industry, not only in quantum computing based on trapped ions, but in all of the modalities, was looking for what would be the simplest set of logical operation or the simplest gate set that would be universal, meaning that you can comprise any algorithm out of it. And it turns out to be operations on single qubits or pairs of qubits. And with these two Lego bricks, you can comprise any algorithm from. So first, what we said is working with the simplest set does not necessarily mean that you're making the most out of this physical system. And so what we're doing, instead of working on 1 qubit or 2 qubit in series at a time, one by one, we're operating large-scale multi-qubit gates, which means that instead of shining our lasers on 2 qubits at a time, we're shining our lasers on dozens of qubits at once with a sophisticated spectral engineering of the laser in all degrees of freedom of amplitude, time, phase, frequency, and so on, to essentially drive all of these degrees of freedom at once to complete one big fat operation that comprises all of these possible pairs that we otherwise would have done in series. So when we're doing that, we can cram in one physical operation what we would need a few tens or a few hundreds or up to 1,000 sequential operations. So we save up orders of magnitude in time. It's also relax the requirements on error because we're doing just one operation instead of hundreds of them. But this is nice only for a time. When you want to go to even larger number of qubits, then the number of degrees of freedom becomes a limiting factor again. And then what usually people are doing is that they separate the quantum processor into different interaction zones or different traps. And they move the qubits in between them mechanically, physically. They shuttle the qubits around. You can imagine an array like the streets of Manhattan, and you're moving the qubits from one place to another in order to make them connect and interact with each other. And this is a nice idea, but it takes a long time because moving things mechanically is a slow process always. Certainly when you're moving quantum systems, which are very delicate and prone to heating. What we're doing in quantum art is replacing the qubit shuttling idea by a sophisticated optical segmentation of our quantum processing unit, and then reconfiguring how we are connecting the qubits together. So it kind of reminds of how FPGAs work in electronics, right? You have a certain configuration of the hardware, then you give a command and the hardware reconfigures. So we're doing the same by having a long ion chain, optically segmenting it a few tens of qubits at a time, and then just reconfiguring where this optical segmentation occurs, and this moves the quantum information between the segmented trap into the new configuration without having to need to move any qubit around mechanically. So we save orders of magnitude in time again, and we can get extreme connectivity done in one fast operation. And this will enable us to go and be very modular, to go to very large number of qubits while retaining a very small form factor. This is at the
That's
80,000
cool. That's
feet
cool. I
kind
hadn't
of
thought about that. Like
description.
that, actually physically moving things. There's a cost to that. I mean, a time cost to that. And
Yeah,
probably
well,
an energy cost too. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like,
it's in time and energy, and also
right.
in protecting the information. Let's go back a little bit, or maybe now it's coming back to vinyl records. If you
Right,
had
right,
vinyl
right.
records and you had a scratch, you'd hear that scratch,
Mhm.
right? But when you move to DVDs, you need that scratch to be one hell of a scratch in order to listen to it, to hear it, because the amount of data that you could cram into that could compensate for errors that you had in a very good way, because you did things at the speed of light in very high resolution. So our ideas go towards that kind of way of thinking, and instead of doing things very slowly, that take time, that you cannot put a lot of information at the given footprint or area, because you have to have these, mechanical grooves of the vinyl records in that analogy. And you're moving to things that move at the speed of light. You don't need to move things mechanically, and you can more easily go into protecting the information and doing more information operations per unit time or per unit area. It's a
I
work
guess
of art.
it's kind of like solid state drives versus, the spinning disks, right? At a much larger scale or smaller scale, but the same idea.
Yeah, maybe that could be
It's a good
a different
analogy.
analogy.
Or maybe a
Yeah.
bad analogy. I don't know, but
So you're currently building in a space with some very large players. What's your unfair advantage?
Yeah, so specifically in trapped ion quantum computing is a quite small, tight-knit community. Most of the companies came out of NIST in Boulder, Colorado, where my two co-founders, Amit and Roy, came from in the early 2000s, or from the University of Innsbruck in Austria. So everybody knows everyone. It's tight-knit community. Everybody is coming from the same kind of origin. I think what we bring to the table is two things mostly. The first thing is the innovation and creativity in how to do the scale up. No one in the industry is doing our multi-qubit gates. No one in the industry is doing our optical segmentation and so on. And we're not treading on the same beaten path, so to speak. And we did that both on the basis of working in the trenches in academia for 20 years and establishing these coherent control methods, and also by being a second generation company. We had the privilege of looking at what are the other people's approaches and trying to identify where we think that they have shortcomings and provide solutions to them. That's one thing. And the other thing is that we're Israelis. We have chutzpah. We're used to work in fast, efficient processes. Everybody knows everyone. You went to the army with the same people you worked with in the university and then came to the industry. And so doing things fast and relatively lower cost and innovative and creative is something that Israelis have in a very good way. And I think this is part of what we bring to the table, at least in the technological phase at the beginning.
Interesting. I grew up in New York, so I know what chutzpah means. But so did Candace. Candace grew up in New York too. So
Exactly.
no, I mean it's and I think one of the things I remember reading, like the everybody knows, you bring up a good point. I think one of the reasons the startup ecosystem in Israel is so good is because you have that kind of that mixing pot of different people who come in and they serve together for, I don't know what the requirement is, but like, whether it's a year or 2 years, but like you kind of build people, they use that as an opportunity to build out their network. I remember reading this whole thing about startup ecosystems and things like that. It's really when you get really innovative companies, when people that ordinarily wouldn't mix or meet do meet and they exchange ideas. That's
Yeah,
just,
when
yeah,
I was in the Ministry of Defense and we had joint collaborations with people from the U.S. services, we always had these kind of jokes that the people from the Army and the people of the Air Force said, if the Israelis would not bring us to the room together, we would not know each other, right? So that's part of it, but I think it's not the only thing. I think that uh, there is necessity,
right,
and there is also the fact that people are coming from the military is that they're getting a lot of responsibility, huge responsibility at a very early stage, and they mature and they're not afraid to do things that require a lot of guts to go ahead and do that. And if an 18 or 19-year-old woman or man in the intelligence units of the IDF are doing amazing, 007 kind of fantasy work that we've seen in the last month or in the last 2 years around the globe. And these are the same people that they're doing that at age 19 or 20. And then they go out to the world and they bring the courage to do stuff, the ability to drive processes that are very meaningful, plus the innovation that is coming from necessity being the mother of all invention. And
right.
then they can have a good time in driving this to applicability.
Plus, if you're in actual life-threatening situations, the idea of risking everything and starting a company is pretty low on the adrenaline list, right? Like, and I also think too that, one of the things that militaries tend to excel at, or good ones do, is leadership training, right? Leadership, discipline, that sort of thing that I think really sets apart or sets people up for success post-military, right? To start a company, to do this, right? And again, like, if you're doing
Yeah,
these
well, we're still in
crazy
the Middle East
life-threatening things.
neighborhood, so I don't know about discipline, but yeah.
But I mean, I think it's an interesting melting pot in terms of like, ideas, training that these kids get, right? At, early in their
Yeah. And
in their
and I think
lives and their career.
another thing, and or rambling on this, but another thing of
Yeah,
the ethos of Israel is that Israel is like an island country, right? We're surrounded by unfriendly neighborhood, although I hope that we will be able to be smart enough to have more friendly neighbors and be friendly to them as well. And the country has, until recently, has had no natural resources. The only thing that we had is the brains and the people
right.
and heads. And so I think that's also part of it. And the forefathers of the country understood that they need to invest in academia and in industry. The first classical computer in Israel was built just 10-minute drive from here at the Weizmann Institute of Science in the 1950s, right? That was less than 10 years after the Holocaust. The
Right.
country was just established. People were getting food stamps. And a group of people was building one of the first 10 computers in the world. So people had vision, and we're standing on the shoulders of these giants. I think that's also part of it. And this also serves the fact that the Israeli government knows how to do short cycles of transitioning things from academia to industry and pushing the industry forward. We have a lot of support from the Israeli government in doing that.
Yeah, and you see a lot of the smaller countries around the world, or a lot of the smaller countries around the world do this, right? Singapore, right? You said something that a Singaporean government official once told me a long time ago, that we didn't have any resources. We were an island. In that case, they were a literal island, right? So they realized they had to develop their people, right? And you look at the success of Singapore. I was listening to a
Yeah, but they
podcast.
have discipline also.
They do. Yeah.
They are
Discipline
amazing.
is an important thing, right?
Yep.
Taiwan as well, right? Like, speaking of disputed territories, right? Um, we're hitting them all today, Candace. We're hitting
I
all the
know, I
disputed
know. We're
territories.
knocking them
But
down.
TSMC was founded by, I forget the guy's name, but he was a well-established guy in Silicon Valley in hardware manufacturing, and they basically Taiwan leadership realized that they needed to build out a much smarter, more intellectually focused in-country manufacturing, right? And it's a legendary now, TSMC, right? So it's an interesting. I mean, all right. I think investing in people is, and if you do it smartly, is always a good investment.
Sure. Everything starts and ends with people.
Yeah, yeah. For now, until the AI robots take over, but then we'll have other problems.
Do you think the industry will converge on a dominant modality, or will multiple architectures coexist long term?
So I think it depends on what long term is. Certainly now we have a few tens of full stack companies, and we have over 1,000 quantum companies in general. This will scale down and converge, I think, to a handful of companies. I think that in the short and medium term, there's no reason that there will be a single winner takes it all. There is a big enough, blue enough ocean out there, but there will not be multiple vendors of each modality. For example, look at the aircraft industry, how many aircraft manufacturers you have in the commercial aviation. You have a few, but not many. Same in classical compute. You have a few, but not many. So we will get there. Will it be only one technology? Could be, but in a very long term. I think not in the foreseeable future of the next 1 or 2 decades, because we're still in the ramping up. And while we are ramping up, although quantum computing is a universal platform, it could solve any algorithm. On the way there are nuances, and there's a grayscale and advantages and disadvantages, different modalities for specific applications. And I think this is the era that we're getting into first.
That's a good way to put it. I think that eventually, I think we're really in this. You mentioned the early computers when there's only like maybe 10 or 12 of them around the world, right? I think we're not quite that early on, but we're definitely in the transistor-ish era. Like,
Yeah,
if you want to
that's a
map
good
it,
example. If you would take a few years before the transistor and you look at the ENIAC, for example, that had vacuum tubes. And if you would bet on a company building the world's best vacuum tubes, what would have happened? Okay, so
you'd
we're
lost
not
a lot of
there
money.
yet. We are now at there are few technological alternatives. There are pros and cons. Ours is the best. So if you bet on anyone, bet on us. But we need the technology to grow up a little bit more and start to converge before we anticipate a winner. And even if we have a winner, in the transistor era and the integrated circuits, you had CPUs and then GPUs and now TPUs and so on. And that also evolves. So I guess that we have a little bit of ways to go before we see a convergence to fewer modalities.
Interesting. I'm
So
sorry,
when you're
Candace. I don't want to hog the mic.
It's all good. When you're designing architecture, how do you decide what not to build? What gets intentionally left behind?
Yeah, so nothing should be left behind if you're doing the full stack, right?
Okay.
But you need to be very focused in what you need to do in order to show the added value that you're bringing to the table, and not do more of the same that other people are doing, and then you're not special and you're not bringing value. So we're focusing on the core of our products in the coherent control methods that I described before. And so, for example, when we're now about to launch our cloud service soon, There are a bunch of people out there who know how to establish this cloud layer of interfacing and authentication and billing and security and stuff like that. I don't need to do that by myself, although I can if I have to. Similarly, there are, very deep technological problems in certain layers of the stack. For example, quantum error correction. So we are doing quantum error correction internally for our specific architecture, but we'd rather collaborate with companies like Kedma in Israel or Riverlearn in the UK or others that all what they do is specialize in that particular layer of quantum error correction and bring that and integrate into our solution. So you need to balance between what you're doing in-house and you're not letting anyone else share, and what are the things that are totally, technical and you'd rather completely outsource if you can, and what are the things in between that you'd rather collaborate and tap into the best talent in the world rather to build a very sophisticated muscle on your own. And the distinction between these three things is something dynamic. It evolves in time, right? At the beginning, we've done only the core. Now we're doing more than that. At the beginning, we like to do more collaboration and we were dependent on collaboration. Today, we're much more independent. It's things that evolves as the company matures.
Interesting. I know we got to kind of wrap this up soon. So where can folks find out more about you, what you're up to, and where you're going? Like where can folks find out more about? Unless Candace, you had any other questions?
Oh, no, I mean, no, I want, where can people find out more? Yeah, let's find out.
So Quantum Art has a wonderful website. It's www.quantum-art.tech, which is kind of long, but you only need it once. We have their explanations about our technology and our architecture and our scientific publications and our press releases. It's all in there, including our job section. We're growing quite rapidly, both in Israel and abroad. So you're more than welcome to check that out. We're also on LinkedIn. We're also in conferences. I think the nearest one that we have a booth and presenting is going to be at the end of June in Boston, the Quantum Tech Conference there. So you're welcome to shoot us an email or come visit us. The best thing is to come visit us and see the labs in action. So if you're in the Middle Eastern neighborhood and you're not afraid, then you should definitely come and we'll be happy to host you.
Probably some good deals on hotels and travel these days.
Right.
So
not on
much.
airfare.
Airline,
Not on
Airline
airfare.
airfare? Oh, okay.
No.
prices are out of this world.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Yeah,
Frank,
thank
is
you.
there anything else that you want to add?
No, I'm just fascinated by this. Like it's a definitely, I definitely want to take a closer look at your website and kind of see what sort of tech
Thanks
is
a
here,
lot.
because it sounds like you've got a lot of things already figured out in terms of this.
It's a long path though.
Yeah. Well, and also too, you have, whenever your company was founded, I forgot the exact year, but like you have people have been doing this since the early 2000s, right? This was not but a gleam in some people's eyes, more than a decade ago. And my wife actually works at NIST, so it's kind of cool you mentioned NIST.
Oh,
not
which of them? In
the one in Maryland.
In Maryland, but in the quantum stuff, in the Joint Quantum
No,
Institute.
she does IT security, InfoSec.
I saw that.
Like a good,
Yeah.
No, but it's
NIST are
cool. Like
amazing.
they
Very
do
hard
have
to work
kind of,
from the outside with them.
right. That's cool. Plus, Candace's dad was a researcher at IBM working on
Yes,
early.
totally.
Yeah.
So kind of when it was just on the chalkboard, right, or whiteboard.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, awesome. With that, we'll let the outro music play.
Turn it up fast. Candace and Frank blowing my mind at last. Quantum podcast, they're breaking the mold. Science and sky beats, it's bold and it's gold. The multiverse is skanking in time. Black holes are wailing in a horn line so fine. From Planck scales to planets, they're connecting the dots. Candace and Frank, they're the cosmic hot shot. Quantum podcast, turn it up fast. Candace and Frank blowing my mind at last. Quantum podcast, they're breaking the It's bold and it's gold.